Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I'll analyze the case of American Eagle Flight 5342. First I'll look at the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. On January 29, 2025, at 5:18 p.m., American Eagle Flight 5342 departed from Wichita Dwight D. Eisenhower National Airport in Kansas with the intent of landing at Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport in Arlington, Virginia. This is right next to Washington, D.C. The aircraft was a Bombardier CRJ-701ER, which was manufactured in 2004. This is a jet-powered regional airliner, which is comparable to the Embraer 170. It is typically used by commercial airlines for short to medium routes. The CRJ-700 series has a seating capacity between 66 and 78 people, is 106 feet long, has a wingspan of 76 feet, has a maximum takeoff weight of 75,000 pounds, and a cruising speed of 515 miles per hour. As the aircraft was approaching Ronald Reagan Airport, a U.S. Army helicopter was flying in the area. It was a Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk carrying 3 crew members. It was flying under the call sign PAT-25, which stands for Priority Air Transport. The Blackhawk is a twin-engine, medium-lift utility military helicopter, which has a lifting capacity of over 9,000 pounds and a cruising speed of 174 miles per hour. This helicopter is used all over the world, and it can be configured in a variety of ways, including with armament. But this particular helicopter was configured for executive transport. Technically, this helicopter may have been a VH-60M, which is a gold-top VIP helicopter. At 8:39 p.m., PAT-25 started a training flight, which was routine. The crew was experienced. This was nothing out of the ordinary. No VIPs were on board during this flight. 1 minute later, Flight 5342 started its approach to runway 33. At 8:47 p.m., an air traffic controller asked the crew of PAT-25 if they had Flight 5342 in sight. The crew responded indicating they had visual contact and they requested visual separation. This means the crew wanted to maintain separation from the aircraft on their own. This request was granted by air traffic control. PAT-25 was directed to pass behind Flight 5342. Less than 30 seconds later, when Flight 5342 and PAT-25 were at an altitude of just under 400 feet, they collided. The airliner was traveling at about 145 miles per hour at the time of the impact. The collision resulted in a massive explosion, which was captured by a surveillance camera. Both aircraft ended up in the Potomac River. There were no survivors. All 67 passengers and crew were killed. At the time I'm making this video, the investigation into the collision continues. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. This disaster represents the first time that a U.S. airline has experienced a total loss of aircraft since 2009. This is when Colgan Air Flight 3407 crashed into a house in Buffalo, New York, killing 49 people on board the aircraft and 1 person on the ground. The collision was caused by the pilot having an incorrect response to a stall warning. Airlines maintained an incredible safety record, but it only takes one mistake to break the safety streak. Incidents like the collision above the Potomac can cause the public to rethink the hazards associated with flying, but commercial aviation is still incredibly safe. Item number 2, what could have caused the collision between Flight 5342 and PAT-25? Who or what was to blame for this tragedy? It does not appear as though the crew of Flight 5342 did anything wrong on their approach to runway 33. When the collision occurred, the airliner was exactly where it was supposed to be. The airliner was equipped with a traffic collision avoidance system, but these do not provide alerts below 1,000 feet. Again, the collision occurred just under 400 feet. If the crew of Flight 5342 was not to blame, this places the focus on the crew of the helicopter. The pilot of the Blackhawk indicated to air traffic control that he saw Flight 5342. He understood it was his responsibility to avoid a collision and pass behind the airliner. Not even 30 seconds after acknowledging this, the helicopter collided with the jet. This makes it seem like the pilot was not paying attention. Visibility was good. There were no weather conditions that could explain this collision. Considering how crowded the airspace around Ronald Reagan Airport is, I wonder if the helicopter pilot was looking at the correct airliner. Maybe he was staring at another airliner believing it was Flight 5342. Because the other airliner was so far away from the helicopter, the pilot felt completely safe. From his mistaken point of view, there was no need to worry about colliding. The collision occurred before the pilot had a chance to realize how he had focused on the wrong aircraft. Again, this is just one theory. It could be completely wrong. There are many other possibilities and factors to consider. Maybe the helicopter crew became completely overloaded by the congested airspace. Perhaps there was a communication mix-up. Did the air traffic controllers provide adequate instructions and oversight? Could they have intervened or issued a corrective instruction? Were there enough air traffic controllers on duty? Maybe there was a mechanical failure in the helicopter and the crew was attending to it. Perhaps fatigue was a factor for the crew of the helicopter. We will have to wait and see what the investigation reveals. Item number 3. In this day and age, it seems like every disaster becomes associated with politics. This tragedy is no exception. Not long after the disaster, some people were blaming Donald Trump, suggesting that his policies somehow led to fewer air traffic controllers. This is a false claim. Donald Trump was not to blame for this collision. This just shows how anger and contempt are constantly boiling below the surface for many people. They just can't wait to blame Donald for anything and everything that goes wrong. It seems like this would be a hard way to live, to wake up every day with such a fire burning inside. It's really more like acid than fire. There's this caustic rage that never ceases to burn. Not to be outdone in the area of false claims, Donald Trump made a bizarre assertion of his own regarding the cause of the collision. He suggested that the federal government's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion was to blame. Anything's possible, but there is no evidence available to support that conclusion. This is one of those situations where Donald Trump would have been better off just by saying nothing. This is often the case with many of the statements that he makes. There are so many topics that Donald can fight about in the realm of politics, and even specifically around DEI. It amazes me that he wanted to drag this airline disaster into it. I've talked about the dangers of DEI before, but even misguided programs are not to blame for every problem the world has ever experienced. Those are my thoughts on the case of Flight 5342. I will provide an update when more information becomes available. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.